Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's so beautiful at Penn State in the fall, and I'm looking forward to one of my favorite holidays, Thanksgiving. My name is Jacob Gold, and I'm joined by Julia Henry and Bryan Portney. Thanksgiving would not be complete without pumpkin pie, family, and a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. With college football playoffs just over a month away, just seems right to start off the giving season discussing them. As exciting regular season wraps up, I'll look to these analysts to put their college football knowledge and Charlie Brown knowledge to the test. Let's start by setting the Thanksgiving table. You know the characters, you know the teams. Let's jump right into it. Julia, I'll start with you. What do you think about those Hoosiers?
Well, we have to start with Indiana because they're the host. They might be the host of a college football playoff game, and they're like Peppermint Patty. They kind of call Charlie Brown. They get Charlie Brown to host this whole thing. And at this rate, we'll have to see. It is an absolutely huge game this Saturday for them at Ohio State. Might break their undefeated season. But as of now, the Hoosiers would be hosting a college football game. Their stadium hosts just over 50,000, about half the size of Texas and Alabama, those SEC schools that they'd probably be facing. So as of now, they're kind of like Peppermint Patty. They've kind of invited themselves to this inaugural 12-team playoff expansion. Kirk Cignetti just got his contract expanded through 2032. It's the program's first 10-win season ever. So we'll have to see if they can kind of keep it rolling. But as of now, they're the ones getting the ball rolling and setting up this Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, and I'd say that Georgia would be more like Charlie Brown, having the football taken away from him, more like how last week's CFP rankings, they were taken out of the top 12 spots because they lost 28-10 at Ole Miss. Obviously, they're going to get some of that back in this week's rankings, but, you saw also last year that they were let out of the college football playoff for somewhat of a good reason, but, you see that they've had a really tough schedule. They've had to go on the road at number 7 Alabama at the time and number 1 Texas, and they beat Texas 30-15 in that game. And so they should definitely not be held out. Like, Charlie Brown didn't do anything to deserve falling on his back, and I don't think Georgia, with its tough schedule and 2 losses, have anything done to deserve being out of the top 12.
Yeah, and if you're Big Ten fans like us, you're pretty happy about those 5 teams that represent in the AP polls. That Ohio State versus Indiana game is going to have some huge implications on seeding. I doubt either team is going to drop out of the top 5, though. Georgia surviving that effort against Tennessee has given them a good bid for the playoffs, but they're still the first one out at that number 12 ranking. Let's go to 2 schools whose seasons are pretty steady and haven't had big scares so far this season.
Yeah, so I'll go with James Franklin and the Penn State Nittany Lions being much like Snoopy with the Thanksgiving feast that he brought out. Penn State started out the season 7-0. He'd come there, open the door, and made a big feast that he thought everyone would like. Popcorn, toast, jelly beans, and pretzel sticks. And that was the on-field product, however, against Ohio State. It was disappointing to the people at the Thanksgiving table, and it was disappointing to the fans as they lost that game 20-13. And Joe Cool is James Franklin, the orchestrator of this Penn State football team, calling the plays and making the ultimate decisions that lost them that game. And Joe Cool for Thanksgiving, right, he was there because at first he was alone for Thanksgiving, and now you see with James Franklin, right, they were supposed to get in. Now it's not, they'll still get in, but their chances of are less because after the Ohio State game.
Yeah, and moving on to back to an SEC team in Texas. They're kind of like Linus. They always kind of need that comfort blanket. I mean, you saw how they fared in that game against Georgia earlier that season. They lost at home. And they've had solid production from both of the quarterbacks this season, but really they're just a team that tends to kind of not do as well, not show up in those big moments. So it'll be interesting to see how that carries over to the playoff and that big stage and huge stakes for them.
Yes, and with Cool Joe and the Nittany Lions potentially having their first home playoff game, I would be petrified going into Beaver Stadium and facing that electric crowd in a playoff atmosphere. Even though Texas has historically needed their blankie, the cover athlete of College Football 25, Quinn Ewers, has been sensational for the Longhorns this season. Now we jump to two schools that have been the polar opposites this season in the AP poll. These two teams have taken two different paths this season as Oregon has risen to the top very quickly and Alabama's road has been a rocky one. So, analysts, what characters would you assign Oregon and Alabama?
So Oregon, I'm going to have to give them to Marcy. She's the smart one. She's kind of that quiet side character of chaotic Peppermint Patty, as I use, really shaken up the Big Ten this year. Oregon's been nice and steady, keeping that top spot. Dylan Gabriel really leading them. Atticus Sappington from the kicking game really been almost perfect throughout this season. And Oregon's really just found a way to kind of be that quiet, smart presence and maintain that top position. As of now, they will probably likely maintain that number one spot in the Big Ten, have a first round bye, and it'll be really interesting to see how far they can go and if they can kind of maintain this nice, quiet approach that they've had throughout the season.
Yeah, and I would assign Alabama to the character Sally, just because she's kind of the little sister. In this situation, Alabama will be the little sister to... They would be the little sister in this situation. And, you know, they'd be the little sister to Georgia. It used to be, you know, the opposite. Georgia used to be little sister to Alabama, but the times have changed, and with Kalen DeBoer now on this Alabama squad, it's obviously a lot different. And so they'll always be a little behind Georgia, even though they did get that win in Tuscaloosa earlier on in the season.
Sure. And with Oregon leading the Big Ten in their first year with this new conference, it is no question that they are one of the top contenders. As for Alabama, they've been in the playoffs for what seems like my whole life. Only difference? No Saban. Alabama will have a tough road ahead of them. But as we head home to our families, one of the debates that we will be having around the table will be chase for the Heisman and what teams are questionable in these upcoming playoffs. First, your thoughts, Brian.
Yeah, well, there is definitely a lot going there, and I think the last team that was talked about was Notre Dame, and I'll assign that to Franklin. Franklin, as I had seen in the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, he was very quiet. When he walked in the door, he was third in line, didn't really speak that much. He only really said one or two sentences, I believe, in the entire episode. And so you see, you know, just like that, Notre Dame very, very quietly building their resume. They have that win over Texas A&M. So all of that, you know, they're very quiet but unnoticed and yet still dominating.
I agree. Notre Dame kind of has been that quiet team. And the one last teams to kind of touch upon are kind of the Woodstock of this inaugural college playoff expansion. It's Boise State and BYU, these teams that are going to get that automatic bid from out of that non-power conferences. And from the Big 12, BYU just had their undefeated season come to an end with that loss against Kansas. And just kind of like Woodstock from Snoopy, they're just kind of going to fly away. They'll probably lose in the first round or that second round, as BYU will have that bye likely for the Big 12. But unfortunately, they just don't have as much talent as those SEC and Big Ten schools have, which are very heavy out of those 12 teams.
I would completely agree with that, Julia. This year's playoff picture is a messy one, kind of like Pigpen. But I think Julia and Brian gave us a good look into what we can expect in this coming December. It's going to be an exciting new playoff format. As we're on the verge of this Thanksgiving, let me first say thank you again to Julia and Brian for the great analysis. Tonight, let's be grateful for what the game of football gives us and why we love it so much. From the highs of victories to the lows of defeat, college football brings all of us together, from school communities, from California to Pennsylvania, the coaches, the players, the fans, and students all alike. This game always gives us something unexpected. Thank you to those who have tuned in to watch this special edition of the Road to the College Playoffs on Penn State Sports Night. For Julia Henry and Bryan Portney, I'm Jacob Gold. Have a wonderful night.